Hello. Hello, good evening, everyone. I guess by now you may realize that I am not Coretta. Coretta is not here, actually. Coretta is in Uzbekistan or Uzbekistan or some country like that. She gone on a parliamentary, a kind of a conference. So unfortunately, she isn't here. So tonight I'll be carrying the show. It's going to be an interesting show because, as I say, when the cats away, the rats will play. So Coretta is not here. So we're going to have a fun time. Before we actually get into the show, I would just like to wish happy birthday for all those who would have had their birthday within the past 2 weeks, because the last thing we were actually here was 2 weeks ago. So happy birthday for all those who would have had their birthday. Also, for those who would have had bereavement, I know bereavement is very, very difficult. It's something difficult to deal with. It's something difficult to accept. And could be very painful. And it's not just painful for one day, it could be painful for months, could go on for years, sometimes for decades. So if you've had bereavement, we just like to extend our condolences. And we pray that God outstretch his hands and touch you and help you to deal with the pain that you have. Tonight, we're going to start the show on a very sad note, a very unfortunate note. But before we start the show, I'll just ask Philip to play the clip of the police in Linden.
Sing whoa, hear my plea, oh dear. A song from my land. Rose up early this morning to the sounds of crying. Another mother shedding her tears.
Another mother shedding her tears. Unfortunately, it's not just one, it's two. The first one was Ronaldo Peters. The allegation is that he was wanted for rape. But despite the fact he was wanted, someone is innocent until proven guilty. And based on the story that we're hearing from the eyewitnesses, the police came in an unmarked vehicle, a black minibus. And essentially, they jumped out of this minibus and they saw Ronaldo. He was there hanging out with his friends and they shot. And they shot him. That's a version from the eyewitness. The police have a totally different version. But we know the police, we have zero confidence in them. We have little confidence in them. They're claiming that Ronaldo saw them and he ran. And when he ran, he tried to get over a fence. But unfortunately, the policeman was faster than him and had a gun in his right hand and was able to grab him with his left hand and pull him down. And when he pulled Ronaldo down, the gun went off accidentally. I'm not too sure which versions of that story you want to believe, but as for me, I don't believe what the police said. It doesn't quite add up. And the fact is also, you had a gunshot wound to his abdomen. The eyewitnesses claim that they didn't quite take him to the hospital immediately. They took him on a drive. As a matter of fact, the police were arguing that he died on the scene. But then evidence came up, CCTV evidence came up to show that he was quite alive. His arms were moving, his legs were moving, he was talking. And the last time I checked, a dead man can't talk. A dead man can't walk. A dead man can't use his hands. So they procrastinated before they took him to the hospital. And when they took him to the hospital, he was dead on arrival. How could you explain to a mother that her 23-year-old son, young, had a bright future in construction? How could you explain that to his mother that he would marry any longer. That's very, very difficult. So understandably, the Lindeners were very angry, and they have all reason to be angry. They were very frustrated because they've been on this road before. They've been on this road when 3 innocent Lindeners were shot dead. So they've had prior experiences. And they had a COI into that, a commission of inquiry. And the police were held responsible. But in terms of what steps were taken to correct the police actions, well, you can't correct the actions when they've already killed the 3, but to make sure that rules of engagement is clearly understood, because based on how we see it now, how the police operate is that they shoot first, then ask questions later, assuming that you're alive. So that's very unfortunate. So the Lindens were very angry. They were very frustrated. So they came out on the streets and they protest. The last time I checked, protest is not illegal. We speak of democracy and we speak of return of democracy, and yet you don't have freedom to gather, freedom to protest. So there the people were expressing their anger and their frustration with the police. And you would think the police would actually be thinking, well, this is getting a bit out of hand. We have to de-escalate this whole situation. No. They shot another Lindener in his eyes. He was probably seeing a bit too much. Shot him in his eyes dead. And if that is not enough, they shot him with live bullets. I am no police officer. I am no policeman. But I would want to know, what's the role of live bullets in a protest? Whatever went wrong with rubber bullets? The last time I checked, when Clement Roy was Minister of Home Affairs, they bought a water cannon. Whatever happened with that? Why did you have to use deadly force? And the unfortunate reality is that this gentleman who was shot there, the second gentleman, Dan Johnson, I think is his name, this gentleman who was shot there, wasn't a part of the protest. He had just returned from Georgia, minding his own business. And there the wild, crazy policeman, trigger happy, boom, in his eye, dead. I saw the video. The video was quite traumatic. It's totally unbelievable. Where are we going to as a country where you can't protest? Is that democracy? Where are we going to when we can't even talk? If we talk, the cyber laws are there to deal with us. Is that democracy? Where are we going to when you aren't even free to join your own political party? If you, by chance, you happen to be up in the AFC, then you're going to Jack Deal's Black Book. Where are we? Is that democracy? What really is democracy? But we'll get to the question of democracy later in the program. But for the relatives, the mother of Ronaldo Peters, I know your pain. I understand your pain. I cannot feel your pain, but I do understand how it feels to have a death in your family. And the pain is aggravated when it is your son or even your daughter, because no parent ever want to have to go through the scenario where they're burying their own loved ones. No parent. So I understand your pain. I understand how it is actually feeling. But even though you're going through a very difficult time, even though the clouds may appear dark, with time, that pain will gradually abate. It would never go away. It will always be there, but it will gradually decrease in intensity. And for the mother of, or the next of kin of Dan Johnson, I know it's a very difficult time for you. My understanding is that these two gentlemen lived in the same street. Very, very difficult time for you. And I pray that God give you the strength to deal with this difficulty. God give you the understanding, even if it is incomprehensible. But God give you that understanding to understand it to an extent. I wish it was possible to alleviate your pain, but that pain will always be there. And then despite the fact that the Lindeners were obviously in pain, this installed president is to say, he waited until the Lindeners called him. If this was Babu John, nobody would have to call him. He would have ended up there immediately. If this was some PvP strong, who would have ended up there quite immediately. And then when he ended up there, it's like he was literally forced to get there. He wasn't eager to actually get there. But he wasn't the only one there, because he wasn't quite received. The PNC executive was there, executives. And they tried to console the grieving people. Philip, I don't know if you have the video of the PNC executive meeting with the relatives of the deceased. While we wait for that video to be put on, or finally, this installed president went with a standard story. We will turn all stones, no stones. There you see the PNC executives holding hands in prayers, trying to console those who would have lost loved ones. It is times like these when you get to know who are leaders and who aren't leaders. The installed president went and said, no stone's going to be left unturned. We're going to get to the bottom of this. But we heard that story before. We heard that narrative before. When the Henry boys were murdered, did we not hear that? And what happened? Nothing happened. And then he even went further into his stupidity to say the RSS, the regional security system, will investigate it. But the RSS, we've had prior experience with the RSS. We've had prior experience where we've had extrajudicial killings, and the RSS come out and say that the police did the right thing, complimentary towards the police. So you have no confidence in our finale. We have no confidence in RSS. We want an international body that is completely apolitical and independent and is not under the influence of PPP and the corrupt leaders to investigate these unfortunate deaths. Because what PPP is hoping for and praying for is that by promising us RSS, we're going to investigate it, we will calm down and we will forget. We will forget that 2 young men were murdered. But we have news for them. There's no forgetting. Absolutely no forgetting. These 2 boys didn't have to die. And we've heard and we've seen so many experiences. We've had so many experiences. Or in Boston, he was in his bed with his wife, and the police came and shot him dead. Why is it? Why is it that the first thing the police ever do is shoot? Whatever happened to talking? Whatever happened to warning? As a matter of fact, why they don't have tasers? Because if you think someone is getting aggressive and out of control, you could use a taser. Why do you have to use lethal force? Why? How many more have to die before we realize and come to accept the fact that there's something terribly wrong in the police force? Something terribly, terribly wrong with our police force. And until that day when the police become apolitical, because Higgins, he's a creature of the PPP. Until that day when the police become apolitical, we wouldn't have no confidence in the police. But the reality is, if they're not killing us, they're persecuting us. People Persecution Party. Only today, the news broke. You must have heard of Leon Saul. Leon Saul was the former head of housing. And when people were installed, they fired him. So obviously he took him to court for unfair dismissal. And the Chief Justice was quite rational in her reasoning. It was quite commonsensical. She said the minister fired him. But she said the minister had no powers to fire him. Simply because the minister didn't hire him. Which makes sense. If you haven't hired someone, you can't fire them. It's common sense. You don't have to go to law school to work it out. But obviously, Anil Nandalalan is, I don't know what he has in his head. He's as dumb as a box of rocks. He used to argue. He normally comes up with these what appears to be sophisticated arguments. But when you actually look at it, they're very weak arguments. This is his argument. Leon Saul's contract comes under the private law scheme, so it cannot have judicial review. So the Chief Justice looked at him and said, "What nonsense are you talking?" And literally threw his argument one side. So Leon Saul was granted 29 months pay plus benefits. Now today the news broke that Anil Nandalalan is going to appeal the case. But I don't know why he was given leave to appeal. I'm not really a lawyer. But if I had my way as a judge, I would only give someone leave to appeal if they have a credible case, I'm arguing. But the same argument he used in front of the Chief Justice, he's using at the appellate court. The same argument that was discarded, the same stupid argument, the very argument, this is his argument. Leon Saul contract is on a private law scheme, so it cannot have judicial review. I don't know what those words mean, but I just know it's a whole host of hogwash. And the Chief Justice saw it as hogwash. And when he goes to the appeal court, they'll see it as hogwash also. Nonsense. Garbage. Because the principle is so commonsensical. It is so commonsensical. If you haven't hired someone, you can't fire him. The installed minister, Colin Crone, didn't have the authority to fire Saul because he didn't hire him. The entity that hired Saul, that is the board, had the powers to fire him. And only they had the powers to fire him. And that's a very rational, commonsensical argument to make. But obviously it's way beyond Anil Nandalal's understanding. He normally tries to give the impression that he's very legally sound. That's always his disposition. But when you actually look at what he's saying, it never makes any sense. I've been following his arguments quite a while now. And they border on absolute nonsense. But Colin Saul is not the only one who has been persecuted on the PPP. There's a long list. You must have heard of Winston Jordan. Winston Jordan was persecuted in 2023 for misconduct in public office. And the case was completely dismissed. And PP is not happy with that. They bring back a similar case, identical case. Misconduct in public office. It's such a wastage of court's time. I remember one time the Chief Justice had it up to her throat with Anil Nandalal. And she turned, she said to him, this is a vexatious case. And somehow these cases are born on being vexatious because of the man, you tried a man in 2023. And it was dismissed because of lack of evidence. Why are you going to bring back a similar case in 2025? Unless you want to persecute it. But that's how it is with PPP. Once you're not with them, once you don't fit under the 3 Fs, friends, families, and favorites, they will make life very, very difficult for you. So that's Winston Jordan, persecuted. Another one that was persecuted is Trevor Benton. He also gets charged with misconduct in public office. He allegedly gave a lease to land in Ogle when the PP argued that he didn't have the powers to do it. And apparently, he sold some land, allegedly sold some land. And they're arguing that the land was undervalued. But let's talk about PP and land. Proud of it. How many of them have actually paid for the land the mansions are on? How many of them? Yet harassing people. Yes, persecuting innocent people. When will it end? How many more? There's a long list. There's an absolutely long list. Carol Joseph. She was charged for being involved in fraud. They allege that she misappropriated some $6 million when she was the head of MARD, M-A-R-D. Who in their right senses will steal $6 million? $6 million is pittance. It's absolute pittance. But that's the charge you place on her. Plus, they have her in court for these electoral fraud cases. They have Carol Joseph, Valda Lawrence, Clement Mingo, Roxanne Myers, and Keith Lowenfield. All of these people, they have in front of the courts for an electoral fraud case. And I've been following the case. And there was this young lady who was giving testimony, I can't recall her name. But she was completely clueless. Her place was to argue in defense of PPP, and she was arguing against them. completely arguing against them. But they would argue that these people were involved in electoral irregularities. What about Boodoo? Has he ever been prosecuted? He was very blatant in his acts. Then another one prosecuted is Paul Slow. Some allegation of sexual assault. Don't get me wrong, sexual assault is quite serious. I wouldn't want to have my daughter being sexually assaulted. I wouldn't want none of you to be sexually assaulted. But the issue I have with this is when you use such crimes as a political tool, as a political whip, to whip your political opponents. So they're saying some sexual assault case that has been going on forever. And that wasn't there at all. Paul Slow is quite a smart man. He was in the police force. I think he rose to the rank of deputy commissioner. I normally read the stuff he writes. It's very informative. Highly intelligent man. He has a good understanding of the law. I look at his programs, and lots of the time he speaks, I have a better understanding of the law, having listened to him. Not Anand Nandalal, Paul Slow. So he has a good understanding of the law. But yet they're going to come up with this allegation that he's going to reveal the identity of the person who made the rape allegation, the sexual assault allegation. Which man in the right sense would do something like that? Someone who's highly intelligent, who's aware of the law, would go and make such a stupid mistake. But what's actually happening is that these crimes are being politicized to make it difficult and to discredit. Very sad. The next one being persecuted are the Mohammedans. Let me start this by saying, I am no fan of the Mohammedans. I believe that they supported PPP, which is their right. But they funded PPP when PPP was extrajudicially murdering our black youths, when PPP was victimizing us, when they were discriminated against us. They funded PPP. So I'm no fan of them. But I don't have to be a fan of someone to come out in their defense when something is wrong. I don't have to be a fan of them for that. Even if I'm no fan of them, if I see an injustice against them, and I hope one day will come where they will apologize for the part that they played in PPP for the extrajudicial murders. It's not good enough to just go and give someone a wheelchair or give somebody a house. That would actually cut it. We need something to help us to resolve that mental anguish, to give us closure. But having said that, they bought some very expensive cars, some very high-end cars. And 4 years ago, they paid what they think was the tax due on this car, on these cars. Then Jack Diaz came out and said GRA needs to investigate the Mohammedans. And lo and behold, that was a queue for GRA. They come out and said that how The Mohammeds owed them 900 million in back tax because they undervalued the luxury vehicles. Well, that allegation in itself raised many questions. Who was sleeping on the job in the first place to allow 900 million to pass through GRA? What investigation have they done to identify those who are culpable? What steps have they taken to make sure that there's no reoccurrence? What is the GRA we're talking about? Another entity under the control of the PPP. So because the son, I'll call him Baby Mohammed, has political aspirations, and apparently he's going into PPP strongholds and he's pulling crowds. They don't want him to continue what he's doing. So they're using the GRA, they're weaponizing the GRA to put a tax on them. That is definitely wrong. That is definitely wrong. Then they arrested him last night, Baby Mohammed, arguing that he pulled some gun on somebody who was flying a drone over the Mohammed's mansion. You know, it's illegal to fly a drone over somebody's house and be recorded. But people don't think about that. They don't think about that. So they arrested him last week because they say he pulled a gun. But Dharamlal allegedly pulled a gun on a man that was going wrong with his wife. Whatever happened with him? Let's talk about him. Because it's about time we need to show the double standards in our society on the PPP. Because the names I've just called, I'm not trying to be racist, but when you see blatant racism, you can't ignore it. And there's blatant racism that all these people who are being persecuted are blacks. All of them are blacks. So let's talk about Nigel Dharamlal. We'll see another side of the coin where if you have political connections, you're above the law. You must have heard this story. If you haven't heard this story, you were living under a rock. A 16-year-old girl made allegations against Nigel Dharamlal. Based on what she described, Nigel Dharamlal was grooming her because from the age of 15, I think, buying her gifts and all manner of stuff. Then when she reached the age of consent, as some men would say, after 12 is lunch, but the age of consent is 16 years, he invited her home by him. So she was a bit suspicious of his intent. So what she did, she went to her smaller brother. And what Nigel Dharamlal did, the first thing he did, he realized that the brother could be an impediment to his actions, whatever action he wanted to undertake. So he turned the TV on, his 10-year-old brother, Nigel Dharamlal, turned his TV on, put on Kids Show, and put it up loud, 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 and took the girl upstairs and allegedly raped her and sodomized her. The girl, through different media, the story came up. And it was going perfectly well, smashingly well, until it get to the DPP. That woman in the DPP, I do not trust her. Harry Basha, whatever her name, I do not trust her. She had all the evidence in front of her. she sent it back to the police, the case file. You need to get more evidence. And while they're palavering in terms of getting evidence, the girl suddenly withdrew her case. And suddenly there's no case against Darren Lal. How is that possible? How is that possible? The rumors that the girl was paid off, which I believe, some paying off had to take place. $10 million Ghana dollars, plus she was offered a scholarship. How is that possible? And then if that was not enough, there was another case of a 27-year-old young lady who also had experiences with Darren Lal. The rumor is that there's this particular job she wanted, but she had to go through Darren Lal to get the job. And the allegation is that in a room, Darren Lal raped her. That's the allegation. The story just died down. Don't hear anything about it. Just like the 6-year girl, don't hear anything about it. But when you compare and contrast that with Winston Jordan, with Trevor Ben, with Carol Joseph, with Valda, and the others, you realize that the law is applied differently for some people. But that's not all. Can you remember Mae Thomas, Permanent Secretary Mae Thomas? She was going to China when she was stopped in Miami, I think, for aggressive interrogation. Her phone was confiscated and her visa was removed. She came back. Everybody was talking about it, except PPP. And then the big bombshell drop. She was sanctioned. Sanctioned for money laundering, allegations of money laundering and gold smuggling, and doing favors for the Mohammeds in terms of giving them contracts and getting paid back for that. The law was applied differently for her. The Mohammeds are being harassed while she is at home getting a fat salary. How is that possible? Tell me, how is that possible? This is absolutely shocking. How is that actually possible? You're not hearing of any prosecution for her. And then this idiot, Finale, would come out and say that the law is blind and the laws apply equally to all and they're not harassing the Mohammeds. The law is going through its course. But what about Mae Thomas? As I said before, I am no fan of the Mohammeds. Absolutely no fan. Absolutely no fan of the Mohammeds. But that's not all. There are lots of people who are friends, families, and favorites of PPP. Sharon Grace, remember him? The man from Housing, CEO for Housing, who was able to buy a house for nearly 800,000 US dollars in America. We all know. People don't really get paid that amount of money in Guyana. We all know that. But then the story got a bit more complicated where El Ahmed was convicted. He's a known fraudster. He was convicted. But anyhow, El Ahmed was able to acquire large squats of land. To cut a long story short, there was a quid pro quo going on between Sharon Greaves, allegedly, and El Ahmed. You would think something as significant like as that would warrant an investigation. Not only this PPP. They haven't investigated at all. They have not investigated at all. Then this other one is very interesting. Our next FFF, friends, families, and favorites. Sharon Hicks. You must have heard of her. Sharon Hicks was a public servant, public secretary for Human Services. So, the story goes this way. She told a man, she tell a man, you cannot get a contract unless you give me some bribe. That's the allegation. The man got tired of her and this bribe business, went to the police. So the police now mark some currency, money market, put mark on the money basically so that it could be identified. And gave it to the man and said, pay that to Hicks as the bribe. Just pay it to Hicks. The police came and arrested her with the money in her hand. The money's in her hand. The marked money's in her hand. And she resigned as permanent secretary. Then she ended up in front of the courts. But her story, this is not easy to be her story. The man who made the allegations suddenly withdrew his story. Suddenly withdrew his story. And the result is, the case has been dropped against her. But the money was in her hand. You don't need a man's story. How should explain the marked money in her hand? But that is PPP. People Persecution Party. They only persecute people who are not associated with a party. You tell me, on God's earth, how could she have had the marked money in her hand? But yet, she getting off. Tell me. This is not fair. This is certainly not fair. But let me tell you what else is not fair. Have you heard of Kurt De Silva? Yes, you must have heard of him. Kurt De Silva is a brilliant lawyer for GCOM who went to court and argued the law to the extent that the Chief Justice was impressed with his argument. But his only crime is that his argument wasn't supportive of GCOM case. What he said basically, it makes lots of sense. For general elections, you don't have to have proof of address. But for regional elections, you must have proof of address. So that would mean you have to have two separate lists. Because each election, each general and regional election, has different criteria. It makes lots and lots of sense that the Chief Justice was impressed with him. Well done, son. But Claudette Singh, do you have a picture of Claudette Singh? Hear it? Claudette Singh, the three PP commissioners argue a case, a very weak case for the guy to be fired. But the guy just had an appraisal. And from the appraisal, he scored 98%. How could you fire somebody that scored 98%? Nevertheless, he was fired for doing his job. And then you have the CEO, the Chief Election Officer, Who's responsible for that girl Kisoon being in parliament? He got his job. How is that fair? Tell me, how is that fair? These are very, very sad day. Very, very sad day. It's just corruption after corruption after corruption under this PPP. It's very frustrating. But the epitome of corruption is the gold program. You must have heard of the gold program. The gold program is a program initiated by the PP government. The argument is that to give Guyanese opportunity to go to university overseas. Sounds good. So over 1,400 students got scholarship to go to University of Staffordshire in the UK. So they were going and they were going. But then what they realized that the lecturers are not British. They sound like if they're Indians. And also the times that they have to wake up to do class. It's not British times, it's India times. Just smart kids, very, very smart kids. They start investigating. And they start asking questions. And lo and behold, what they discovered is that gold had no, I don't want to use the word links. The exact word to use, I can't recall it. But in essence, gold and Staffordshire University had no relationship, no contract. But then the goal is to turn and argue. We didn't go to Staffordshire University directly. We got to go through a third man, ISDC, International School of Development Corporation, something like that. And Staffordshire University came and said, we don't know ISDC either. So it was a big fraud. These students believed that they were going to the University, Staffordshire University. They weren't. They wasted all their time. So the question I want to know, or the questions I want to ask, is how much monies were paid to ISDC? The head of the gold program, Professor Jacob Abadi, he has to excuse me, I can't pronounce his name properly. It's one of those very convoluted names. I'll call him Professor Jacobs. Said that there's 7 times with ISDC. So I would wish to know how much monies were actually paid to ISDC. That's the first thing. The second thing is that did you do due diligence to make sure that this ISDC is actually a real organization? And thirdly, why did they go through a third man, ISDC? Why did they not go to the university directly? That sounds very, very, as we say in Ghana, fishy. But in terms of the students, what happened with these students? How many of them have gotten into credible universities? 1,400. But I always had my suspicions about this gold program when I heard 378 students graduated PhDs within 3 years. That doesn't make any sense. Anybody that has had experience in academia would know that you cannot do 378 students cannot do a PhD within 3 years. You may probably have 1 or 2. But the vast majority will take 5, 6 years. But yes, 370 all passed. Nobody failed. That sounds like a degree factory. a diploma factory. Fraud, fraud, fraud all of it. And then we can now talk about the CEO, the Chief Education Officer. We're still in education. The Chief Education Officer sent out a memo order and tell it the teachers, you're working until Wednesday, and on Thursday and Friday, you're doing reports and records. That's fine. That's fine. But there's just one problem with that. He didn't tell the breakfast people that they need to get breakfast for the kids. So when all the kids turned up to school, because he said they're working until Wednesday, they didn't have enough breakfast. So the poor teachers had to be like Jesus Christ, sharing 6 loaves and 5 fishes, so that every child could have gotten a breakfast. But that's just PPP, that's how they are. They have no idea of how to plan things. But it goes deeper than that. When there was Pagwa, I have great respect for my Hindu brothers and sisters. There was lots of celebrations, Pagwa celebrations in school. But now, Easter, a Christian holiday, they don't have that degree of celebration. They don't have any at all. Discrimination against Christians. But what they fail to realize, what these idiots fail to realize, is that they're able to celebrate their birthdays because of Burnham. Burnham is the one who said every religion will have their own holidays. And now they discriminate against Christians. Absolutely unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I don't know what to say. But suffice to say, this chief education officer name is Saddam Hussein. So you know with a name like that, nothing good will be coming out of him. These are very interesting times. So Marco Rubio visited Guyana. You must have heard. People were excited. 3 Secretary of State visited Guyana within the past 3 years. They were over the moon. Until Marco Rubio went to Suriname and opened his mouth and said he was being driven on some road built by the Chinese. And the road was in such a deplorable state that he nearly got concussion. Concussion is a form of brain injury. But PPP, there's such an embarrassment for a political arm. You would want to believe you'll take ownership of your work. They didn't. They tell Marco Rubio that is the opposition bill that wrote the Heroes Highway, now known as Concussion Highway. So the man went away with the impression now that is the opposition when they were in power built that highway when the highway was actually built by PPP. But then this is not the first time we hear stuff about that highway. Aubrey Dalton himself called it a abortion highway because of how the road is such a deplorable state. And it wouldn't come as a surprise to you if I'm to tell you that the person who built the road is a friend, family, and favorite of PPP. And then Jack just come out and now want to defend the indefensible. How are they going to put asphalt overlay to even up the road. But when we Guyanese were complaining about the road and the state of the road, nothing was done. But because the Secretary of State is a foreigner, automatically something is done for him. But it's not just the concussion highway that has problems. Look at all these roads that they're building. Within a day or two, potholes. And the reason being is that they're not getting competent people to build the roads. It's people with political connections and people who can give them kickbacks. So that if it costs $10 to build a road, and they give them $10, give the contractor $10 to build this road, the contractor has to give PPP $2, so it's only $8 remaining. Plus he has to get paid. So he get paid $4. So $4 remaining. So what you're gonna get is an inferior quality road because you don't have enough money to build it. Because the money that was meant to build the roads is going into the pockets of the politicians, PPP politicians. It's only the other day in South Runville we saw 8 lampposts fell. And then they had a similar reoccurrence at Cliff Anderson's gym. And it all comes down to corruption. All comes down to corruption. Very sad. I'm sorry to be depressing you, but we have to call a spade a spade. Then we had this club Jack Deal coming out and saying that the 38%, the tariff that was imposed on Guyana is not 38% it's supposed to be. Gotta be less than that because he has data to show gotta be less than that. But the concern I have is that this tariff business was being talked about for the past 4, 5, 6 months. It's like if you have your house and you hear a gun ring at 2 o'clock, and you would have heard that at 12 o'clock. You would take steps to make sure the rain don't get into your house. You lock your windows and lock your doors. So they heard of this 38% being imposed on Guyana for over 4 months and did nothing, absolutely nothing. There's some group, lobbying group, they're paying $50,000 a month, 50,000 US a month to lobby America on behalf of Guyana. That's something that they're supposed to be doing, lobbying on behalf of Guyana. You don't wait until you get a 38% imposed on you and ask for clarity. You gotta be proactive. Trump is pretty much aware that you're gonna want to impose tariffs on us. This is our exports and these are our imports. We think we should probably pay like 20% and blah, 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 blah. Argue a case. Get the lobbying group to argue a case. But what these idiots did, they just sit down. And when it imposed on them, then they ask for clarity. What clarity you need? What clarity you need? It's just day after day after day of incompetence and complete cluelessness that would completely shock you. You don't ask for clarity, but when you actually look at it, in Latin America and the Caribbean, we get the highest, 38%. And as Trump described it, the worst offenders get the highest. But I think this is deeper than money. I think Trump is punishing PPP for the relationship they have with the Chinese. And he wants people to actually choose between the Americans and the Chinese. They can't have both. And that tariff that was placed on Guyana is a kind of punitive so that people can get the house in order. So that they can get the house in order. I don't think it's economics. That's just my opinion. I honestly don't think it is economics. But to see leaders who aren't proactive, and it's not the first time. We could go back to when they went into power, when we had COVID. What countries were actually doing? They heard that these different drug companies are developing vaccines, and these countries, wise countries, were making the orders in advance, paying in advance, so that when the vaccines come out, they will get it. What people did, they sat back. And obviously, when the vaccines come out, the vaccines company would give to those who pre-order. So that forced people now to go and get unapproved vaccines. That's when they went and get Sputnik V from a middleman, a Middle Eastern middleman. They love these middlemen. It's just corruption. The Middle Eastern middleman who went through to get a Sputnik V from Russia. Not from Russia, from the Middle East. No, from Russia, because Russia was producing Sputnik V. They love this thing with middlemen. And what if that's Jack Deal's doing? They love middlemen. So they want proactive in terms of the management of COVID. And as a result, lots of people died that hadn't supposed to die. Then we had the issue with the dengue fever. Dengue fever is predictable. You know, certain seasons you'll get dengue fever. Rainy season, you'll get dengue fever. It is spread by a mosquito, the Aedes aegypti mosquito. So, if you know dengue fever season is around this time, and you know the mosquitoes can spread it, common sense can tell you, you spray for the mosquitoes before the season come on. So that by the time the dengue virus comes, there's no host, there's no mosquito. What people actually did is even until lots of people started to die, they said, oh, we need to spray. What foolishness. Not being proactive. They're just not proactive. When it comes to bribe, they're very proactive when it comes to bribe. And those are only two examples of an installed government which is not proactive. Very unfortunate. Very, very, very unfortunate. But going back to these tariffs, I would like to know what impact it would have on export. What impact it would have on the average man. I know the price of goods can go up. We living in a perennial cost of living crisis. How's going to affect the cost of living in Guyana? And there's so many more questions. So many more questions. But it's the poor who can actually feel. Very, very sad. You ever wonder Why every time PP is in power, they're always finding cocaine? Every time they're in power, cocaine seems to be just, they have this affinity for PPP. So now, today in the news, we heard that they found some cocaine in some storehouse in the police. And when everybody think it was cocaine, it's flour. Somebody stole the cocaine and replaced it with flour. This is unbelievable. But it's not the first time. It happened last week, where 7 kilograms of cocaine just disappeared and was replaced by flour. I would want to believe that a police force would have some kind of system in place where they audit whatever they have in their compartments. I audit it regularly to make sure that's not being moved. But how is it possible? Cocaine being converted to flour. Some people have some spiritual powers. These police, they can just do some magical things. Houdini. So, they're doing an investigation. At least they said they're doing an investigation. But we know when investigations are done on the people, you don't hear anything about it. Has anybody heard anything about a helicopter crash investigation? What do you hear about them? Don't hear about all this cocaine that just disappearing. And that's not all. 8,000 kilograms of cocaine was found in the jungles. 8,000 kilograms of cocaine. This is unbelievable. It's completely unbelievable. It's beyond reasoning. Why is it when people is in power, all this cocaine is being found? Why is it? And that's not all. Some ship was in West Africa, and the French contacted the Guyanese compatriots and said, something look fishy about this ship. It has a Guyanese flag. We need to investigate it. Go to investigate this ship, 6.3 tons of cocaine. My gosh. This is completely unbelievable. But every so often we hear about a small man get caught at the airport with a half-pound of cocaine. But you don't hear the big ones getting caught. I always believe that lots of these people you see putting up these mansions, money laundering, and some drugs. But the big ones don't ever get caught. But how that amount of cocaine could have passed through Guyana and the authorities not aware of it? I don't believe that they're not aware. They're pretty much aware of it, but they're not doing anything. They're not doing anything. Just very, very sad. Just very sad. Just very sad. So we had an interesting case recently with Coretta McDonald, where Mark Light, Dr. Mark Light, the present president of the GTO, was arguing a case that Coretta McDonald can't have a role, a position in the GTO while being an MP. And he vociferously argued his case. But if you remember, let's talk about Mark Light for a second. Remember when the teachers could protest for 70-something days? 70-something days they protested for. I remember how it ended abruptly. Mark Light just gave himself powers, supernatural powers, to end the strike. Let me explain to you what should have happened. A union calls its members out for a strike by first having a vote. And if a certain percentage of the members vote for the strike, then they'll have a strike. Likewise, if the government of the day propose some sort of agreement, the union takes it to the members, and the members vote on that agreement. If the majority say, if a certain percentage say yes, yes it is. If a certain percentage say no, no it is. So that's how it works normally, but not under Light's GTU, Mark Light's GTU. They got the votes for the strike. But in terms of ending the strike, the government offered 10% when the teachers wanted 29.5%. So you could clearly see that there's a big gap between 10% and 39.5%. Anyhow, the teachers weren't in a position to ask for the 10%. So what Mark did, or allegedly did, he went and misrepresented data to the teaching council, to the GTU Council, General Council. And they obviously dealing with misrepresented data, went along with him. And he unilaterally accepted 10%, despite the fact that the teachers never had a voice in it. How could that be? How could that possibly be? And when Coretta now wants to go for president of the GTU, you can't do that and be an MP. But he has to be a blind man. What happened with Gawu, the head of Gawu, who's an MP? Anyhow, the judge was quite commonsensical. The judge said the Constitution, your Constitution, your GT Constitution, doesn't speak to that. Doesn't preclude her from becoming the president and being an MP. But it's obviously Mark probably rewriting the GTU Constitution to suit himself. Very sad. So the election is going to be sometime soon, or sometime soon, I think. And my personal view, I've written an article about it before, is that it should get rid of Light. Any leader who doesn't listen to his followers and do things in a dictatorial way, in an autocratic way, is not a good leader. Is not a good leader at all. Even if he feel or he felt that it was the 10% is enough for him, he shouldn't force it on the teachers. Give them a vote, give them a voice. But he failed to do that, which is definitely and definitely wrong. Definitely wrong. So, coming down to the close, I want to talk a bit about democracy. Because you hear people always talking about this democracy. In 1992, it says it's a return of democracy. In 2020, we had the democracy fighters. And everybody seemed obsessed with the word democracy. But they're completely ignorant to what it actually means. Completely ignorant. Do you think in a democracy, protesters are shot dead? No. You have freedom of assembly. Unless those protesters are violent, even if they're violent, those aren't going to shoot them dead. There are other ways you can actually use. There's a water cannon somewhere in Guyana. When Clement Ray was Minister of Home Affairs, he bought one. They're rubber bullets that they can use. Because in a democracy, you're supposed to have freedom of assembly. We don't have that in Guyana. Freedom of speech. Ever so often you hear someone is being arrested. I remember Sheriff Duncan, for example. The police turned up at his house with AK-47s because he apparently said something that caused somebody emotional distress. If you have emotional distress, you need to see a psychologist. And ever so often, this cybercrime laws is being selected. I'm still to see the day when somebody from PvP is arrested for those cybercrime laws. There's always somebody from AFC. But it's not supposed to happen because if you have a democracy, you should have freedom of speech. In a democracy, it's supposed to have also freedom of association. Whether or not you want to associate with a union or a political party. Leon Saul, who was terminated unfairly as based on what the Chief Justice says, was terminated on the basis that he was appointed by APNU AFC government. So he has to be APNU AFC. But in a democracy, is that relevant? Is that really, really relevant in a democracy? In a democracy, it's supposed to have free and fair elections. Was 2020 a free and fair election? I would beg to differ. When you have 49 ballot boxes without the statutory documents, is that free and fair? When Claudette Singh says she's not gonna count these votes in these boxes without the statutory documents, and then subsequently she changed her mind. But is that democracy? Is that a fair election? When you have the dead voting, over 4,000 overseas voting, when they were overseas, is that a fair election? How could that be fair? When you have over 1,200 oaths of identity cannot be found, how could that be fair? How could that be fair? So are we really living in a democracy? Or in Boston, absolutely, or in Boston, are we living in a democracy? When the state executes you, Is that a democracy? Ask the Henry boys, the relative of the Henry boys, the mothers were so tortured, they died from pain. But ask the relatives, are we living in a democracy? Ask the relatives of Ronaldo Peters from Linden, who was shot dead. Are we really living in a democracy? Ask Dan Johnson, are we actually living in a democracy? The evidence would show that we're not. But yet people would want to delude themselves into believing that we live in a democracy. And lots of them have this minimalistic approach to interpretation of democracy, to just elections. Elections is just one pillar of democracy. There are many more. Many, many, many more. So I'll end how I started. Those boys didn't have to die. Those boys never had to die. And what that police did is what they've been doing ever long. It's not today we have extrajudicial killings. It's not the first time. It has happened too many times. And it always seems to happen on the PPP. It always seems to happen on the PPP. And it is a very, very dark day when innocent people cannot protest, when people cannot go out and protest. I remember the 2020 elections. There were people who burned the streets. There are people who assaulted the Granger bus with the school children inside. There were protesters who had the police running. One of them ended up with a fractured arm. There are people who create riots. The very Irfan Ali, he attempts to upturn a vehicle that had a Minister of Foreign Affairs in it, Dr. Karen Cummins. Were they shot? None of them were shot. Absolutely none of them. I remember Earl Edgier going into the hotel where Granger was giving a speech and carry a crowd of people. Mr. Granger must have felt threatened. Were they shot? They weren't shot. Under the Granger administration, you had the freedom to speak. You had the freedom to speak. You never exist in fear. But sadly, under this PPP, who's trying to convince us that we live in a democracy, sadly, on the PPP, it's not a democracy. It's a very, very dark day for us. A very, very dark day for us. And for the people of Linden, I'll pray for you. I know it's a very difficult time for you. But things will improve. We have the powers to vote them out. Let's do just that. Good night and thank you. Philip? while we wait on Philip to get back, there's just a story that touched me very, very deeply. This coward of a man, he goes by the name of Khan, visits his girlfriend, and apparently had some misunderstanding. And the coward that he is, shot her in her head and killed her. When will it end? When will it end? When will the day come when women can make choices and don't have to be fearful of us man folks causing them harm? And the coward tried to end his life. I just wish he survived, because I want him to feel the full force of the law, the complete full force of the law. Why is it? Why is it that these men believe that they have the powers is within them to just end the life because someone may want to end the relationship? Why is it? Why is it that we cannot move on? Why is it that we cannot respect our women folks? I tell you the truth. I have a wife. And lots of times she says stuff I don't want to hear. I'm quite sure likewise I would say stuff that she don't want to hear. But that doesn't mean I will go and visit her with some blows or something to sound. Sometimes I just put on a headphone on my ears. Sometimes I just come from 1 to 10. But I think it's a real major problem. And people is not doing anything about it. Vinja Prasad, when will you start developing policies to deal with domestic abuse? Because domestic abuse is a massive scourge in Guyana. It's a big scourge. When will you develop policies to deal with that? I think it should be started in schools, where young men in schools must be taught that a woman is equal to them, that a woman can say no, that a woman can end the relationship. It has to start in school. It is getting too commonplace. Every day you open a newspaper, some woman being murdered or shot or... Look, that girl, a young girl, Vaughn, 12 bullets. Even if she had a knife in her hand, you could have run away. Even if you shot her once, you didn't have to shoot her 12 times. One would have been enough if you felt threatened. Coward of a man. And then his family approaching the judge to get favors. Let him feel the full force of the law. Let him feel it. And to all the men out there, let me tell you this. A woman has the right to say no. A woman has the right to end the relationship. A woman has the right to suck her teeth. Because at the end of the day, we do worse to women than women do to us, and women don't kill us. I just pray for the day when things will change. I just pray for that day. But I don't see it coming from this PPP, because they themselves abuse their women. Look, Jack Deal. Look what Vashi was saying about Jack Deal. Look about the former Minister of Health, Barry Ramsaran, who wants to assault, as he said, assault the woman because she was protesting. Just that. Anyhow, guys, it is 1 o'clock here. I need to go sleep. We'll see you next 2 weeks, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Philip?